Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of the 2020 Travel Connect virtual series, What's Really on the Dark Web. I'm your host, Peter Kane, Director of Marketing Strategy, Content and Brand for ARC, and today I am joined by Andrei Barysevich, co-founder and CEO of Gemini Advisory. Before we get the conversation started, I want to thank all of our viewers for their continued engagement with ARC and with the Travel Connect virtual series. I encourage everyone to connect with us on your favorite social media platform using the hashtag TravelConnect2020. Additionally, we're recording this in September of 2020, which is this year's ARC Fraud Awareness Month. ARC is hosting a series of webinars dedicated to help the global air travel community better mitigate and fight fraud. Additional details are available on arccorp.com, and recordings will be posted to ARC's YouTube channel. With that, let's get started. Welcome, Andrei. Really glad you're here today.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
I guess to kind of kick things off, if you could provide a little bit of background on yourself and on Gemini and what you all do over there.
Sure. I'd like to refer to myself as the veteran of, dark web research. I have been, assisting various law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, Secret Service, and Department of Homeland Security for a number of years, in various investigations. I think the first time I saw the first cybercriminal forum was almost 15 or probably even 16 years ago. So it's pretty much it was the time when the dark web as we know it today didn't actually exist. The term deep in dark web actually was coined, I would say maybe 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it didn't. Up until then, it was pretty much, the dark web was pretty much known as the criminal underground. And this is how I still prefer to refer to it because, I think there's just too much noise around, deep in dark web. And we can actually touch, upon it, at later time. So I started my career as the analyst and the consultant for the law enforcement. And then I worked for a couple of threat intelligence companies, including Flashpoint, Recorded Future. Both are well-known threat intelligence companies. But I also realized that while the threat landscape is very broad and different, and every company has their own unique use cases, the fraud actually, is a standalone beast of its own. Fraud has been and still remains a bloodline for a cybercrime, right? And this is where it all starts. This is, the ultimate. I would say the ultimate reason why most of the people actually becoming cyber criminals is to steal money, right? Like to make money, and fraud presents that opportunity to them. And a lot of times it's just kind of like a gateway drug. This is how you start. We've seen many times how bad guys actually progress from fraud to more nefarious, cybercrime. So we've decided to build a company, a Gemini Advisory, to support this specific use case to help our clients fight fraud. And we've been quite successful in this niche. We work with various clients, including financial organizations, law enforcement, and travel companies as well. So, and I want to think that we understand fraud quite neatly. We understand how the bad guys operate, how they think, and why they do what they do. And most importantly, I think we have enough knowledge and expertise to help our clients stop fraud, hopefully before it actually happens.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. You talk about how fraud is almost that gateway drug into more nefarious actions. And it's sort of it's the thing that I find most fascinating, and we'll get into this a little later about kind of dark web, is it's this weird reflection of reality, I'll call it, right? Like real life. You think about how criminals progress in a physical space, and it's very much the same from fraud onto other things. So, this is Fraud Month for ARC, and our travel agency and airline and other travel customers and partners are going to hear about the dark web and the deep web. So can you kind of describe exactly like what is it that we're talking about here, and like how do I get there?
Well, it's quite simple. I mean, like, so, well, we need to understand that let's say, deep and dark web or criminal underground, as I mentioned before, it's not a single resource, right? It's not a single website. It's a collection of different websites. If you kind of like have to pinpoint, the number, I mean, we're looking at hundreds, not even thousands of websites. So each website may be dedicated to a specific type of activity. You have less dangerous websites, that kind of like operate and offer a lot of different types of data, to support fraud. You have different websites or different forums and communities that support cybercrime in general, like hacking, for example, right? And the sale of compromised data. And then obviously you get to much more, darker places where, let's say child exploitation, happens, and where people sell drugs, for example, or people sell guns, right? Although it's very rare, to find a website that actually sells, guns, for example, right? Because the bad guys also understand that the profit margins on guns are very small, right? You're talking about hundreds of dollars, right? You can make that on a single airline ticket, that you stole, and bought using stolen credit card data and then resold it on a forum, right? So there are very, very few people who actually list, and sell firearms, right? But there's obviously I would say one of the biggest markets is the market of drugs. And it's a cross-border, international market. It's it's a huge, huge, huge business. But then fraud still, as always was and still remains, I would say, the biggest money maker to the cyber criminals. And so you're looking at different websites that can be accessed through either, clear web. By clear web, I mean, clear web tools, I mean regular browsers like Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, you name it, right? A lot of those websites you can actually find by searching Google, right? You can actually type and say, hey, I want to buy stolen credit card data, right? Or you can just say, online hacking forum, right? And you will be able to find a so-called dark web website, right? The reason why, I don't like to separate, clear web criminal websites from, let's say, those that operate on Tor is because most of the hacking forums nowadays have mirrors, which means you can access them on Tor, which is, or Tor network, or using, Tor browser, or you can access the same website using regular browser, right? The problem lies is where is in the point where you actually have to pay for the access, right? Or you have to get, an invitation from an active member, right? Some low tier forums, they have open registration. So anybody can just go and register an account same time, in the same manner how you would register an account on any, Reddit forum, like, for example, right? But if you actually interested in getting into more sophisticated forums, more sophisticated communities, then you would need an invitation, or you would have to pay to get access to the community, right? Then obviously none of them, or at least very few places, would accept, PayPal, right? I mean, not a single forum will accept credit card, but some of them actually accept PayPal. But then most of them, if not all, would accept Bitcoins, right? So this is the de facto, currency of the dark web. You have to pay with Bitcoin because it allows you to transact with people across the globe. It's very convenient, it's safe, it's secure to some degree, untraceable. Although we've seen cases when the law enforcement was actually able to track down, specific criminals behind Bitcoins. So, and those communities also divided by forums. And the forum is just your regular forum. You may be a car aficionado, right? Like a typical forum where you just go and post questions. Reddit is a forum, right? So the same type of forums exist in the criminal underground, where people, they advertise their tools and services, right? Or they discuss things, right? Somebody may be saying, hey, like I have access to a bank account in Texas, right? I'm ready to accept, SBA PPP loan transfer, which is a huge business right now for the criminals, right? The government actively supports, small businesses, and the bad guys obviously attempting to cash out on this as well. So somebody may be looking for a partner, to deploy new malware, for example, right? Somebody is looking to sell credit card, stolen credit card data. Some people actually offer, travel tickets, right, or hotel bookings at highly discounted prices, like for example 50% discount, right? Obviously, they buy those tickets through leveraging stolen credit card data. So all of that can be found on forums, but then you also have marketplaces, and the marketplace is different from a forum in a way where you don't really communicate with sellers, right? It's like an eBay, right? You have listings, and if you are a vendor, you just upload your data, be it once again, stolen credit card data, compromised bank accounts, or other tools and services, right? And the buyers just simply have to deposit Bitcoins to their, account, and then they can start buying things and tools, fully automatically without having to interact with the vendor. So I would say, those two types of websites are the primary kind of like websites on the dark web. You have the chat rooms and you have the marketplaces. Now, the third one, which is sort of appearing right now quite actively, and the bad guys have been using quite actively, are the telephone messengers, right? Like be it the Telegram, Viber, or WhatsApp, right? Or some other Chinese tools, right? Those are now being actively used to sell goods. However, the bad guys are still leveraging marketplaces and the forums because it allows them to have an unlimited visibility, right? Meaning, if you have 50,000 users, right, on a single forum, every single one is a potential buyer. But if you sell something through your smartphone, for example, right, you are basically limiting yourself to your current user base, right? So there's been a lot of discussion that the bad guys are shifting from the, more conventional kind of like typical forums and marketplaces toward the mobile apps. But in reality, they just leveraging mobile apps to supplement what they have built on the forums, on the marketplaces, right? In case a marketplace is taken down by the law enforcement, the bad guys want to be able to convey the message, to their buyers, right? We still here, like you can still keep buying from us, but now we're going to do it through another forum or through another marketplaces.
That's really interesting. And again, it just kind of goes back to, I like how you talk about it as this like kind of criminal underground instead of this separate, deep web, dark web from, the clear web, and how it kind of all the things that retailers think about, in legitimate business models, is also taking place here with criminals, right? So whether that's, specials, holiday specials, right? Brand integrity. I was reading one article, I think it was actually on your website, about how, we can get a little bit more into this later, ransomware as a service, there's a brand issue associated with that from the bad guys' perspective about how their service is being used. And again, just kind of comes back to, at the end of the day, these are people selling something. And so it's how do you understand what that future sale looks like and how do you get ahead of that and prevent that, which I think is super fascinating. From a travel perspective, what are some of the, we talked a little bit about some airline tickets and hotel bookings, purchased through fraudulently gained credit cards. what are some things that like our travel agencies and our airlines really need to consider when operating and thinking about this space?
Well, I don't think that, travel, agencies and travel industry in general, is somehow that much different from, other, let's say, conventional businesses or e-commerce businesses. You still have to know and, understand how the bad guys operate. If it looks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Like, so if somebody is, trying to leverage the credit card to buy tickets, to fly out of, let's say, once again, Texas, right? And the card is issued by a Swedish bank, right? Well, that's a red flag. Even if your risk scoring system doesn't tell you that it's a risky transaction, you should still exercise a common sense, right? Because the bad guys are also, utilizing tools that would allow them to trick anti-fraud systems, right? They've built their own tools. They call them actually anti-detect tools, right? Where they can pretend to be a legitimate user so that, your anti-fraud system does not spot a transaction, right, as a potentially fraudulent, right? But I would say the biggest, benefit and the biggest, the most powerful gatekeeper, to help any business is, leverage your common sense, right? If the email does not look legit, it's probably fake, right? If once again geolocation doesn't match, the transaction, start looking into it. Maybe it's worth, calling the buyer, right, and confirming the transaction with them, right? Also, maybe, engage a bank and say, we have a suspicion that the card may have been compromised, and let the bank call the customer. Because once again, the reason why the underground is so resilient is because they've built, and when I mean they, by they, I mean, all the different criminals, right? They've built all the support businesses to facilitate crime, right? They have, let's say, online phone calls, right? So basically, they have services where they hire native speakers, right, to call businesses, to call banks if a verification of a transaction is needed, right? So they can actually, let's say they a bad guy is using a credit card issued by a Spanish bank, right? And it's a Spanish customer, right? Let's say the transaction was blocked, and the bank is asking, for a customer to reach out to confirm the transaction, or it may be not a bank, maybe a travel company, right? They can easily find, and it only costs like $5-10, right? They can easily find through one of those online phone calling services a person who would actually dial in, right? Pretend to be a card holder, right? And verify the transaction, right? So you kind of like have to think outside of the box, right? But if you actually, as a company, as a travel industry, reach out to a bank, right, and say, hey, can you please confirm with the customer that he actually initiated that transaction? Well, guess what? The bank has the correct phone number on file, right, for that card holder, right? They can validate that card holder through, let's say, social security, physical address, phone number, whatever, right? They have all the information to confirm that they actually speaking to the rightful owner of that account. So that's, I would say this would be one of the kind of like one of the steps, a travel agent or travel company can protect themselves. Obviously, I'm not, saying that every transaction has to be confirmed like that, right? But then again, not every transaction is fraudulent, right? So typically, that we all know that the bad guys, who actually purchase and make the transactions, with stolen card data, they initiate their transactions on a very short notice, right? So they have a person who needs to fly, let's say tomorrow, right? They will book the ticket today or maybe even tomorrow morning, right? Hours before the departure, right? Which again does not allow, does not offer enough time, for an agent to confirm that transaction, right? So kind of like be open-minded, think about, what are you kind of like dealing here with, right? Is it a repetitive client, or is it a new client, right? Check where this client is located, right? Me, like I said, some companies I bet have tools to detect IP addresses, like, okay, if you have a visitor, from one country, but then the travel itineraries from another country, that's a huge red flag as well. So basic things, could be very, very successful.
Yeah, when I in a previous life, I used to do PR for both HP enterprise security products when before they kind of broke that all up, and then a privileged identity management company called Exedium, which is now part of C8 Technologies, I think. And with HP, what our constant refrain was, when not if, right? So develop your models, train your employees, prevent, detect, respond, recover, and think, as you're saying, kind of outside the box, and assume that the bad guy is in his lair and he already has all this stuff thought through because he has to, right?
Exactly.
And similarly with Exedium, we always saw that how important identity management is, right? Because it's kind of the right keys to the kingdom, essentially, if you get privileged access. And it was the same mantra, right? Is just assume that they're going to get it, and then how do you shut it down as quickly as possible? And I think that's something that all of our viewers can kind of take to heart. And really thinking about the employee on the front line is like your kind of last defense almost. And thinking through, like, okay, what's the time of the itinerary? When are they booking? Where are they coming from? What's the card? Where's the card from? Similar as we deal with any sort of phishing emails that might come into a system that get past any sort of firewalls or other systems that are set up, like, don't click the link, right? So I think that's really good. That's really good advice. From a kind of thinking through travel, I'm curious, like, what kind of margins travel related stuff has, right?
Well, actually, the travel related criminal business is probably one of the most profitable. Just to break it down, so when the bad guys buy or book airline tickets or the hotel stay, they don't need your typical kind of like a mule's address. Are you familiar with the term a mule? There's a money mule and there's just a regular mule, right? So it's someone who is willing to accept something on your behalf, be it a stolen package, be it a stolen bank transfer and whatnot. So, and in a typical fraudulent transaction, the money mule services or mule services are the most expensive, right? You have to pay that person upwards to 35, 40%, right? With the travel fraud, you don't need none of that, right? You everything is done online. So then even if a ticket is resold at, let's say, 60% discount or 40% discount, right? All of that pretty much stays with the fraudster. He still has to buy stolen credit card data, but then the stolen credit card data is cheap. Let's just kind of like, depending on the country, the average price is about $20 per card. Let's assume that not every card will be accepted. So let's say for a single booking, they have to buy 3 or 4 cards, right? Combine it with, let's say, a fake phone number and everything else, maybe $100 per transaction, right? That's the cost, right? But then again, a single airline ticket could cost upwards, $1,000, $1,500. So that's a massive profit. It's a big business. It always was a big business, and it still remains a big business. After the COVID-19 started, pretty much everything halted. The entire economy, even the criminal economy, stopped, right? And for 3 months, we pretty much didn't observe that much criminal activity. The demand for the stolen card and stolen bank card data went down, I would say, easily by 75%, right? The offers of various services also, went down significantly. And yet, in the last month and a half, we've seen that all of that is coming back again, right? And we actually think and predict that the volume of fraud is going to increase exponentially for two reasons. First, a lot of those criminals didn't make money for 3 or 4 months, right? So they now have to kind of like get all the profit, and kind of like build all of that security and financial security. They pretty much all the savings they've depleted, right? They have to rebuild it. The second is the online fraud is becoming a huge problem, right? Well, the online transactions is a huge business right now, right? Like everybody wants to buy things online. I know that the last time I went to grocery store was probably like 2 months ago, because now we get deliveries, pretty much, every week. So, and the entire world pretty much, migrated from in-person transactions to online transactions, right? But the tools and services, they sort of remain the same, right? So a lot of businesses, they're not ready to deal with the influx of online transactions.
That's really interesting. And that 75% down is also kind of fascinating, because it's not entirely, but similarly reflective of just simply like travel demand went down, let's say towards 90%, and we're now pushing back towards into the 70s. And it's, again, just a kind of a reflection of the general direction of an economy. When there's money, people will try to take advantage of it.
Of course.
And it's something definitely for our viewers to keep in mind, to be even more, vigilant as we head out of this, head into some semblance of a recovery over the coming months and years. But in an environment where there's still so much fractured, it's so fractured still, right? Where, who's allowed to travel where, and, when do you need to quarantine, and all of that confusion just creates a more chaotic system that creates more opportunity for those who want to take advantage of it.
Right.
As we kind of pivot a little bit, ransomware has been one of those topics that's been popping up more frequently, at least over the past, definitely over the past like 3 or 4 years, as bad guys have kind of moved from the individual to the entity.
Yep.
And, we've seen it in travel as well. So can you just provide a brief description of like what ransomware actually is and what the objectives are behind using it?
It's very simple. It's pretty much extort money from a business owner. And you're right, it's not just a business owner, it's pretty much anybody. But, as you just mentioned, the bad guys are no longer interested in infecting, individuals where they can make, few $100s, right? That's beyond the point. They are now after millions, right? They are now after, hundreds or tens of thousands of dollars in profits, and they can only get it from business owners, right? So we hear a lot about large, multinational businesses being hit with ransomware, but for every, enterprise level business, there are thousands of small businesses that are being hit by the fraudsters and hackers daily. Think about it. Let's say a single CPA accountant, right, during the tax season, typically makes $10,000 to $20,000 in profits every day, right? And all the data they have must be readily accessible, right? Customer data, statements, anything and everything, right? So the bad guys, the ease with which they can infect a CPA accountant, right, is just, it's like taking a candy from a kid, right? You just need to send them the document, infected document, right? Pretended to be from one of the clients, right? And I can guarantee you that all 100% of, CPS will open, right, those documents. So the bad guys will then infect the system, right? And if they don't want to spend so much time with the victim, they'll just infect it, demand the ransom. For a small business, I would say they would demand anywhere between $20,000 and $50,000. And then, but some bad guys nowadays not only infect the systems, they actually steal the sensitive data. So if you're a doctor, if you're a travel agent, right, you probably have some of the data which you shouldn't be keeping in your computer, right? But for the convenience sake, you probably do, right? Well, guess what? if your system gets infected and the bad guys can easily grab that information, your problems could be so much worse, because now what they do, and they will come back to you and they say, look, we hacked you, we infected your system, we encrypted your system. And to answer your question, this is exactly what the ransomware does, right? It encrypts your system so that you cannot access your computer anymore. So all the files are encrypted. You cannot open them. You cannot operate as a business, right? So the cost of to the business is tremendous, right? But on top of that, now the bad guys are actually coming back to you and saying, well, by the way, we've got all those files you kept on your computer, right? And if you don't pay us, right, we're going to put it either A, on the dark web so that other fraudsters can take that data and then attack your customers individually, or we're just going to release it in public. And then depending on what sort of business you run, right, you may be in deep troubles. Like if someone runs, let's say, medical practice, right, he could be open to massive litigation because, suddenly not only he lost, or she, the business lost the data, right? The business is now in breach of HIPAA, which is the government regulations, right? And it actually protects, personal healthcare data very, very, heavily. So any business can be attacked easily. So I would say, ransomware is, frankly, is the #1 threat right now for a business, for survivability of a business.
Yeah, and like I didn't even, again, you have these massive enterprises which, have insurance, have the money typically to be able to cover anything, but it's the small, medium-sized organizations that are just so at risk. And, that's a lot of our folks. So, what can somebody do to even, to begin to think about how do I protect myself from that likelihood?
Right. Well, there are several steps. I think the first one should always be, think what you're going to do if, God forbid, like your systems are infected with ransomware. Because you only have a couple of options, right? If you're lucky, you can decrypt your system through one of the online nonprofit organizations. There are several of them, some operated by the law enforcement, some operated by the antivirus businesses, communities, where they kind of like pool the resources, right? And they collect all the information, different decryption keys for different types of ransomware. And a lot of times you're actually able to decrypt, right, your files free of charge. You don't have to pay the bad guys. Well, if you're lucky, that's the best case scenario, right? Like you probably suffer, a downtime of, a couple of days, but beyond that, you'll be all right. But let's say, imagine what happens if you cannot decrypt your system, right? There's no way. If there's no decryption key, the only person who can actually decrypt your data would be the criminal, right? Who actually infected your system, right? So think what you're gonna do. Just, you have to understand how much, you lose by pretty much, not operating in a single day, right? So if you know that, your losses every day, let's say $10,000, maybe the only feasible option for you would be to engage the criminal and to pay the ransom. Now, I'm against paying the ransom, right? I say do not pay criminals, because everybody knows that by paying criminals, you will incentivize criminals to do more attacks later on, right? You also pointed at that, criminals actually cherish their own reputation, right? They care about reputation, and that's true, because the bad guys are now operating as a brand name. Like you have Revel ransomware, which was one of the most popular, and infamous right now. Well, they would always decrypt your data, right? Because they know the first time they don't decrypt your data, right, they will not get the payment next time from other victims, right? So it's beyond the point, but you will fuel the criminal economy, right? So if you can, if there's a slightest chance that you can just pretty much, erase your entire system and start from scratch, maybe it's going to take you 2 weeks to get all the records back from the paper copies, right? I always say do that, don't pay criminals, right? However, if you feel that, it's not an option, right? And it's either you pretty much destroying the business altogether and shutting down your business, or trying to gain access to your system, I mean, you may have no other option but to pay criminals. The second step is, if you think that you will pay criminals, think in advance how you're going to buy Bitcoins, right? Because the Bitcoins is the only currency the bad guys will accept, right? And if you've never purchased Bitcoins, right, it's not that easy to buy, tens of thousands of Bitcoins, right? You may be able to go to the Coinbase and buy $2,000 worth of Bitcoins with a new account, but definitely not not $50,000 in Bitcoins, right? So think about it, maybe open an account ahead of time, right? Buy some Bitcoins ahead of time, yes, the price of Bitcoin fluctuates, but in the long term, it seems to be going up. So you might actually, make money in the long run, right? But that's kind of like very important to understand how you're going to buy Bitcoins, right? And then obviously, normal security precautions, right? Have backups. And when I say have backups, have a backup on a hard drive, which is disconnected from your system, right? Do not have it plugged in 24/7, right? Because if your computer gets infected, your backup will get infected as well. Make it a habit to encrypt your data and to store it on a backup once a day. Also, if there is no reason for you to have the files on your system, and if you can actually use online cloud services, be it Dropbox, be it box.com, or better all, use Google, Google Drive. It's all free. You don't have to pay, nothing for, but if you store all your information online, your data will be protected, right? So for as long as you keep your system virgin clean without, having to keep all the sensitive information locally, you will be okay. You can easily restart your system from scratch and you'll be just fine. Obviously, you have to have, some, at least some kind antivirus. I will not make any recommendations, but I can say that even if you install the free antivirus, it's better than not having any antivirus on your system, right? Yes, it could be noisy. Yes, it could sometimes, block the legitimate websites, and you have to click, extra times, to open a website or to allow, certain process or software. Trust me, it's all worth it, right? And then I would also say basic security hygiene. If you're a team of one, well, train yourself, right? If you have a team of people, train your people, right? Do not, readily open files, any file that's been sent to you. Keep in mind that there are several types of documents which are kind of like the first step to any ransomware attack, which is the Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft PowerPoints, right? Those are the, I would say, 90% of documents that, that have embedded ransomware payload will come through Microsoft documents, right? So if you open the file and it's telling you that, well, you need to activate the macros, right, on your Word to view the content, or would you like to view remote content? Do not, do not click, do not open it, right? Because this is how the bad guys will then infect your system too. Maybe it's a legitimate file. If it's a legitimate file, confirm with the sender. Give them a call, send them a text message, right? Even if a file comes from your friend, reach out and ask, did you just send me the file? Because what if his computer was infected, right? And the bad guys used his email to send 2,000 emails to every single recipient. So basic security hygiene is the first step.
Yeah, I think that advice is so good, and we're probably gonna have to clip that out and make it a standalone
Sure.
for our folks. And I really liked how you brought up the leveraging other organizations, right? Whether that's the nonprofits, whether that's the kind of intelligence syndicates, we'll call them for lack of a better term that I have right now, or even just something like a Dropbox or Box or Google. When I used to work with AWS, we talked about the shared security model and how it's so much more robust than just an organization kind of going it alone. leverage the large entity with the vast resources to create as secure an environment as you possibly can create, and let them deal with all that technical work while you focus on your own individual security hygiene or your employee security hygiene. Yeah. Well, this was fantastic. I can't thank you enough. And I probably could have kept going for another solid hour if I wanted to. I have a whole list of notes here about NotPetya and, and all of the other, and Maersk and everything. But I'll leave us here for now. Again, everybody that is viewing, thank you so much. As I mentioned earlier, this is ARC's Fraud Awareness Month, so be sure to register for our series of webinars. And if you don't have the opportunity to do so, you can definitely view the recordings on ARC's YouTube channel, where you're probably watching this now. And lastly, please engage with us on social media using the hashtag TravelConnect2020. So with that, thank you, Andrei, once again, and thank you to all our viewers.
It's a pleasure.
Be safe, be secure, and we look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Thanks.